We're going to now use our trig skills to figure out how to solve for an unknown angle. So in this instance, there's some basic steps that we want to try and follow. It's fairly formulaic in terms of how we go by figuring out an unknown angle. So step one, we want to label all three sides of a triangle. Just like you do when you're trying to solve for an unknown side length, you have to label the HOA. The second thing you need to do is identify which trig ratio to use. Oftentimes just by going through and identifying SOHCAHTOA and then using process of elimination. Then you substitute the given values into the equation, and then you solve the equation by using the inverse trig function on your calculator. So we've got two examples here that we can attempt this with. So first off, let's follow our own advice and label the HOA. So first things first, we've got the hypotenuse. We know here that we don't know what angle x is. That's what we're trying to figure out. So we got to label the side that is opposite of angle x. So opposite of angle x happens in this case to be 35 units long. And that means that the last piece must be the a value. Okay? So I want to figure out now, well, which trig ratio do I need to actually use? So I've labeled my HOA, and now I got to figure out the trig ratio. So I'm going to write out SOHCAHTOA. Okay. Now in this case, I'm actually going to underline the first letter of each of the three letter blocks because all of them represent an angle. It could be sine of an angle, cosine of an angle, or tan of an angle. So that's why I'm actually going to underline all three of those letters. Okay. Now I want to identify, well, what information do I actually have? Okay, and so I actually have, I know the value of my opposite, so I can put a check mark above my opposite. And I also know what the value of my adjacent is. So I can put a check mark above my adjacent. So now, based on this information, I know that the only ratio that has enough information for me to solve is the tangent ratio, because it'll help me to solve for the unknown angle, and it gives me I know what the opposite is, and I know what the adjacent side lengths are. Okay, I have two of the three pieces of information with tan, and so that's the ratio I got to use. So now I'm going to go, I've done step one, I've done step two, now I'm going to go through and do step three. I'm going to substitute the given values into the equation. So the equation is tan of any angle is equal to the opposite divided by the adjacent. So now if I substitute in, I've got tan of x, because I don't know what my angle is, so I'm going to leave that as tan of x. And that's equal to my opposite, which happens to be 35, divided by 12, okay, because my adjacent side length is 12. So in this case, I don't have to do any cross multiplying. What I need to do is actually convert the 35 over 12 as a fraction. I want to change that into a decimal number. So I do 35 divided by 12, okay, and that gives me approximately 2.9167. So I'm going to round that, okay, and that's what tan x is equal to. So now what I need to do is I got to get that x value all by itself, which means I have to do the opposite operation of tan. Well, the opposite operation of tan is inverse tan. So I've got tan to the -1, and I've got tan x, and that is going to be approximately equal to inverse tan of 2.9167. Okay, so all of these steps are all equal to each other. Okay, so now what I can do is I can actually eliminate the inverse tan and the tan that's on the left-hand side of the equal sign. So these two will actually cross each other out. So I'm just left then with the x value. Okay, and so my x value is going to be equal to approximately 71 degrees. Okay. So what I did to get 71 degrees, I did second function tan to give me the inverse tan button, and then I put in my 2.9167, and that spits out approximately 71 degrees. Okay, so again, we're going to use the same process when we're looking for the solution down here. So here we have a second triangle. In this case, we are again trying to figure out the value of angle x. So let's follow our process. First thing we need to do is obviously label our HOA. So in this instance, we know we've got our right angle our angle right there. So 100 happens to represent our hypotenuse, the length of our hypotenuse. The opposite side is over here. We have no information for the opposite. And the last piece, therefore, must be the adjacent. So now we've labeled our HOA. So now I'm going to go through, I'm going to figure out which trig ratio should I use. So I'm going to write out my ka toa. Now I'm trying to figure out an angle. So again, because I don't know what angle is, it could be the angle for sine, it could be an angle for cos, it could be an angle for tan. So I'm actually going to go through and I'm going to underline the first letter of all three trig ratios because I don't know what the angle is. Could be, I potentially could use any one of those three. So let's figure out what information we do have. Well, I know that I have the value of my hypotenuse, and my hypotenuse happens to be 100. And so I've put a check mark above both the hypotenuses. That means automatically that I cannot use the tangent ratio because it doesn't, I don't have enough information for tangent. Okay. The other thing that I need to know is that I also have the value of my adjacent side. Okay. And so the only ratio that has enough information for me is my cosine ratio. Because with cosine, I have, let me go back here. With my cosine ratio, I have the unknown angle, I have the hypotenuse, and I also have the adjacent. So knowing that I need my cosine ratio, I'm going to now substitute and solve. So I've got cos of x is equal to a over h. And I would love for your formulas or for your solutions to look something similar to what I've put on the board here, because this just describes how each line is equal to the line above. Okay, so I'm going to now substitute in the values that I have. So I have cos of x is equal to my adjacent, which is 91, divided by my hypotenuse, which is 100. So that means that cos of x is equal to 0.91, because when I take 91 and divide it by 100, I get 0.91. Now I got to get this x term all by itself. Okay, and right now the opposite operation of the cos is cos inverse. So I'm going to do cos inverse. It's probably a slightly larger one than what I want. Okay, so cos inverse of cos x is equal to cos inverse of 0.91. Okay, so I know that cos inverse on the left cancels out the cos that's on the left, so those two things cancel each other out. So I'm just left with x is equal to approximately, and I'm going to figure out what x is equal to. So I'm going to do second function cos to give myself the cos inverse function, and then I'm going to put in 0.91. And that's going to tell me that it is approximately 25 degrees. I'm going to round it to approximately 25 degrees. Okay, so I know then that my x value here, or my unknown angle, is going to be approximately 25 degrees.